What happens when a man tries to erase someone's entire existence with 7 words and she responds with something he never saw coming? It was a Tuesday afternoon in Greenville, South Carolina. The kind of day that feels like it's half asleep. Sun sitting low behind clouds, parking lot half empty. The kind of quiet that makes ordinary moments feel like they matter more than they do. The Harmon's grocery store on Pelham Road wasn't fancy. It was the kind of place where people grabbed milk on the way home from a double shift, where kids begged for cereal in the snack aisle, where the floors were slightly worn down the middle from years of carts rolling over them. And that's where she was, Dr. Naomi Osei-Mensah, 43 years old, still in her white coat because she'd come straight from the hospital. Stethoscope tucked into her left pocket, her ID badge clipped to her lapel, her hair natural and full and rising from her head like a crown that hadn't been asked for permission. She was standing in the produce section holding 2 mangoes, one in each hand, trying to decide which one was riper. That was it. That was the whole crime. She had no idea that in the next 5 minutes, a stranger was going to try to take everything from her with just his mouth. And she had no idea that what she said back was going to make a grown woman on aisle 3 put her hand over her heart and cry. Nobody who saw Dr. Naomi Osei-Mensah walking the halls of Greenville Memorial Hospital would have guessed what her first year in America looked like. She came from Accra, Ghana at 19 with a single suitcase, $200, and a scholarship letter that her mother had laminated and kept on the wall of their house. Her father was a teacher. Her mother sold fabric at the market 6 days a week. They had scraped and sacrificed and prayed over that letter like it was scripture because for them it was. Their daughter was going to America. Their daughter was going to become a doctor. What the scholarship letter didn't mention was the cold. Not just the weather cold. The other kind. The kind you feel when a professor looks through you instead of at you. The kind that lives in small silences and mispronounced names and the way certain people say certain things with a smile that doesn't match their eyes. Naomi had felt that cold before. She'd learned to keep moving through it. She got her undergrad degree in 3 years. Got into medical school on her first application. Finished her residency in internal medicine at Johns Hopkins, and then came to Greenville to build something. Not a career. A community. She ran a free clinic out of her church every 3rd Saturday. She mentored pre-med students from underfunded high schools. She showed up, and on this particular Tuesday she had just finished a 14-hour shift during which she had delivered news to a family that no family ever wants to hear. She had held a stranger's hand while he took his last breath. She had done paperwork and made calls and kept herself together the way doctors are trained to do. Because the moment you fall apart, the room falls apart with you. So she stopped at Harmon's on the way home. She just needed a few things. Mangoes, because she hadn't eaten a proper meal since Sunday. Rice. Maybe some yogurt. 15 minutes in and out, and then she could go home and sit down for the first time all day. That was the plan. His name didn't matter. It never does with people like him. What mattered was that he was a man in his mid-60s, broad-shouldered, face the color of something left out in the sun too long, wearing a cap with a logo on it that told you everything you needed to know about who he thought he was and who he thought the world belonged to. He'd been watching Naomi from the moment she walked into the produce section. You could see it on him the way some people wear their contempt out loud on their faces before they ever open their mouths. He grabbed a bag of apples, moved closer than he needed to, then stood there, arms crossed, like he was waiting for something to justify what was already building inside him. Naomi didn't notice him yet. She was focused on the mangoes. But then he cleared his throat. Loud. Deliberate. The kind of sound that's designed to make you flinch. She looked up. He looked at her. White coat, her badge, her stethoscope, and something in his expression shifted. Not toward respect, toward something uglier, like the evidence of her accomplishment was offensive to him personally. "You know," he said, his voice low enough to be private but loud enough to carry. "Some of us were born here. Some of us built this country." He paused, letting the weight of what he was about to say gather behind his teeth. "Why don't you go back to where you came from?" The produce section went still. A young mother 2 feet away froze with her hand on a bag of oranges. A teenage boy stocking shelves at the end of the aisle looked up slowly. An older black woman rounding the corner with her cart stopped moving without even realizing she'd stopped. Naomi didn't move, didn't blink, didn't look away. And for a moment, just one moment, the air in that store felt like it was waiting to see if she would break. She didn't. Here's what most people expected to happen. They expected her to shrink, to look at the floor, to grab her groceries and walk away because that's what people like him counted on. The embarrassment, the not wanting to make a scene, the calculation that happens in a half-second when you decide that your dignity isn't worth the chaos that comes from defending it out loud in a grocery store in front of strangers who might not stand up for you anyway. Or they expected her to get angry, to raise her voice, to give him exactly what he was looking for because then he could point at her reaction and say, "See, that's why. That's always why." But Dr. Naomi Osei-Mensah did neither of those things. She put down the mango. She turned to face him completely, unhurried, the way a woman who has survived 14-hour shifts and impossible diagnoses and oceans and sacrifices turns to face things, like it cost her nothing, like she had been waiting her whole life to be standing exactly here in exactly this moment. And then she smiled. Not the fake kind, not the frightened kind, the real kind. The kind that confused him before she even spoke. She said, in a voice that was warm and clear and reached every corner of that aisle, "Where I came from." She paused. Let those 3 words sit. "You really want to know where I came from?" He opened his mouth, closed it. She took a small step forward. Not aggressive, just present. "I came from a woman who woke up before the sun 6 days a week to sell fabric at a market in Accra, Ghana, so that her daughter could have a future she herself would never get to live," she said. "I came from a man who taught school for 30 years and never once called in sick because his students had no one else. I came from a country with more history in its soil than most people on this planet will ever read about in any book." The teenage boy at the end of the aisle had completely stopped working. The young mother hadn't moved. 3 more people had drifted to the edge of the section without meaning to. And then, she continued, still looking at him, still calm, "I came here on a scholarship that I earned. I went to medical school at Johns Hopkins. I completed my residency in internal medicine. I have been a physician at Greenville Memorial for 11 years. This morning I held a man's hand while he died and I made sure he was not afraid. This afternoon I told a family their mother had beaten cancer. Tonight I stopped here to buy mangoes because I haven't had a real meal in 2 days." She tilted her head. "So I'm not sure what it is exactly that you'd like me to go back to. But wherever you think that is, I can assure you, it made me everything. Standing in front of you right now." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't feel like absence. It felt full, packed with something heavy and rearranging. Like every person in earshot was quietly doing the math on something they'd never had to add up before. The man opened his mouth once. Nothing came out. He looked around, maybe expecting someone to back him up, to smirk with him, to give him the signal that he was the one who was right here. But nobody did. The young mother was pressing her lips together hard. The older black woman by the cart had one hand over her chest. The teenage stock boy had set down the box he was holding without realizing it. The man looked back at Naomi, and for one unguarded second, something moved across his face that wasn't anger. It was something older and smaller. Something that looked, if you were watching closely enough, almost like shame. He grabbed his apples, and he walked away. No final word. No comeback. Just the sound of his footsteps moving toward the far end of the store and the slow, collective exhale of everyone who had witnessed what just happened. And then the older woman with the cart walked over. She was maybe 70. White-haired, deep-lined, the kind of face that had been through enough to know what things cost. She reached out and put her hand on Naomi's arm. Her eyes were wet. "Baby," she said quietly, "I have been coming to this store for 22 years. And I have never heard anything said inside these walls that I needed to hear the way I needed to hear that just now." Naomi looked at her, and for the first time since she'd set down the mango, something in her face shifted. Not broken. just finally allowed to be human for a second. "Thank you," she said softly. The young mother came over next. Then the stock boy, still holding nothing, just walked up and said, "Ma'am, that was something else. I hope you know that." A cashier had appeared at the end of the aisle. She'd heard everything from her register. She wasn't even trying to hide that she'd been crying. But here is the part of this story that nobody saw coming. Here is the open loop that was about to close in the most unexpected way possible. 20 minutes later, Naomi was at the register. She'd gotten her mangoes and her rice and her yogurt, and she was quietly loading things onto the belt. The store had mostly returned to normal. The low hum of a Tuesday afternoon, the beeping of scanners, a child asking for something in the cereal aisle. A man appeared behind her in line. Not the man from before, a different one. Younger. Maybe early 40s. Glasses. A button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was holding a box of pasta and a jar of sauce, and he looked like someone who had just come from an office and was trying to get home. He'd been in the store the whole time. He'd heard everything from the next aisle over. He cleared his throat gently. Naomi glanced back. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm sorry to bother you. Are you Dr. Osei-Mensah from Greenville Memorial?" She looked at him more carefully. "I am." His jaw worked for a second like he was trying to find the right entry point into something big. "My father," he said. "Thomas Greer. He was your patient about 3 years ago. Congestive heart failure. Do you remember him?" Naomi went still. She did remember. Thomas Greer, 71. Stubborn in the most lovable way, always arguing about his salt intake, always asking about her family. She remembered him. "He passed last year," the man said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were doing the harder work. "But I want you to know that in the last 2 years of his life, after you got his condition stabilized, he lived. He actually lived. He saw his last granddaughter born. He came to my daughter's graduation. He sat on our porch last summer and watched fireflies for the first time in years because he said he finally felt good enough to just sit still and enjoy something." He paused. "He talked about you like you were family. He said you were the first doctor who ever made him feel like a person and not just a file. And I have been wanting to tell you that for a year, but I never knew how to find you, and now here you are." Naomi put her hand on the register counter. Steady, grounding herself, and then the man said something that nobody in that store was prepared for. "I also heard what just happened in the produce section, every word of it, and I want you to know that my father, Thomas Greer, that stubborn, beautiful man, he was from rural Alabama. He grew up in a time and a place that taught him things that weren't right, and he spent the last years of his life unlearning them. And the person who helped him see that every human being deserved to be treated with dignity, one of those people, was you. Not because you gave a speech, just because of how you walked into that room every time." He set his pasta down on the belt, extended his hand. "My name is Daniel Greer. And I don't know what that man said to you today or how it felt, but I want you to know that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. And this community is better because you're in it." Naomi shook his hand, and this time she didn't hold back whatever was moving through her. Her eyes filled. She blinked once, nodded. "Thank you, Daniel," she said. "Thank you for telling me that." The cashier rang up her groceries in complete silence. The respectful, kind, nobody called the local news, nobody staged anything. Naomi didn't post about it. She just drove home, ate a mango standing over her kitchen sink, and called her mother in Accra. Her mother answered on the second ring the way she always did, like she'd been waiting. Naomi didn't tell her the whole story, just said it had been a long day. Her mother said she could hear that, asked if she'd eaten. Naomi said yes, mangoes. Her mother made the sound she always made, half laugh, half sigh, and said, "That's not food, Naomi. That's a fruit." And for a few minutes they just talked. About nothing. About the fabric market and the price of tomatoes and the neighbor's new baby. The ordinary, beautiful nothing of being known by someone who has always known you. When they hung up, Naomi sat in the quiet of her kitchen for a long time. She thought about the man in the produce section. Not with anger, something more complicated than that. Because she had learned a long time ago that people who say things like that are usually afraid of something. They are afraid that the world is bigger than what they were taught. Afraid that the story they were handed about who belongs and who doesn't is starting to fall apart around them. And rather than sitting with that fear and asking what it means, they point it outward. They turn it into a weapon and aim it at whoever looks most different from their idea of home. She didn't excuse it. She never would. But she also knew that what he had tried to do in that grocery store, reduce her to an outsider, erase the 11 years and the scholarship and her mother's early mornings and her father's 30 years of teaching and Thomas Greer's last summer watching fireflies, all of it reduced to go back to where you came from. It had not worked. It had not worked because she had not let it, and because every person in that aisle had made a choice in that moment too. The young mother who stayed. The teenage boy who set down his box. The old woman who walked over and put her hand on Naomi's arm. Daniel Greer, who said the thing he had been carrying for a year because the moment finally gave him permission to set it down. Those small choices were not small. They were the whole thing. The story traveled the way real stories do. Not through a viral video or a trending hashtag, but through people telling other people. The cashier told her sister. The teenage stock boy told his whole lunch table the next day. The young mother told her husband, and her husband told someone at work. Within 2 weeks, someone had quietly nominated Naomi for the hospital's Community Impact Award. She found out when her department head called her into his office, and she walked in expecting budget cuts and walked out staring at a piece of paper she didn't know what to do with. At the ceremony, they asked her to say a few words. She thought about saying something profound, something worthy of the occasion. She had the words. She'd always had the words. But instead she said this. I came to this country with $200 and a laminated letter. I have never once stopped being from where I'm from. And I have never once stopped becoming who I am here. Those two things are not in conflict. They are the whole story. She paused. Do not let anyone convince you that where you started is a limitation. Do not let anyone hand you a smaller version of yourself and expect you to be grateful for it. And when someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong in the room you have earned your way into, you look at them, you smile, and you tell them exactly where you came from, all of it, every part. Let that be the answer. The room stood up. Not the polite kind of standing. The kind that comes from the chest. Somewhere across town, a man in his mid-60s sat in his living room watching nothing in particular on television. He hadn't told anyone about Tuesday. He didn't plan to. But something had been sitting behind his sternum since the produce section. Something that didn't feel like winning. Something that felt like standing in a store and pointing a weapon at a woman in a white coat who had held a man's hand while he died that morning, and all she wanted was to decide which mango was riper. He hadn't expected her to look at him the way she did. He hadn't expected to feel what he felt when she said the words, I came from a woman who woke up before the sun. He sat there for a long time. What he did with that feeling, nobody could say. That part was between him and whatever version of himself was still capable of being honest. But the feeling was there. That was real. And feelings that real, when you stop running from them, have a way of changing things. Dr. Naomi Osei-Mensah drove to the hospital the next Wednesday morning. White coat, stethoscope in her left pocket, ID badge clipped to her lapel, hair full and rising like it always had. She walked in through the main entrance, nodded at the security guard who knew her by name, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and started her rounds. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She always had been. There are people in this world who will try to make your origins into a wound. They will take the most sacred parts of your story, the sacrifice, the struggle, the journey, and try to weaponize it against you. Do not let them. Your story is not a liability. It is the most powerful thing you own. Speak it fully. Speak it without apology. And when someone tries to make you small, stand up straight and tell them every single thing that made you. Share this, if it moved you. Someone out there needs to know they are not alone.